Welcome to the Soul Grit podcast. I'm Ann Taylor McNeese, and I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I also love Jesus, and I'm passionate about all things gospel and therapy. I created Soul Grit to be at the intersection of mental health and Christian faith. Christ followers need a place to ask questions and get answers about mental health. Join me as we dive into real stories and real questions from people who want to honor God with their hearts, souls, and minds. Today, I want to welcome Josette Langevine to the podcast. Josie and I have been friends for basically about half our lives now. We met as maybe freshmen or sophomores in college, both at Stanford University. And we were a part of a campus ministry where we got to do Bible studies together and just kind of figure out how to do life together. Josie was part of my wedding. And so we've, connected over the years. And in the fall of 2019, before the whole world shut down, we got the really cool experience of hosting a panel discussion for our Stanford reunion. And that just sparked this desire in both of us to be able to collaborate a little bit more with the unique gifting that God's given us and the calling that He's given us. So today on the podcast, we're going to be talking about a little bit more about Josie's experience and how life threw her a curveball and how she's been resilient in that, and then some new projects that she's working on coming up pretty soon here that you guys can all have access to for extra encouragement and extra hope. So, Josie, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit and tell us who you are?
And I'm super excited to be a part of this podcast. We've been waiting so long to do something together. So thank you for inviting me to do this. I really just feel called just to be able to give God's story in a lot of ways. So let me actually just back up. So 5 years ago, I think Anne mentioned that, there was some disruptive moment in my life, and it was truly like just, again, a curveball. So 5 years ago, I was doing just crazy things. At Stanford, you're supposed to climb up this corporate ladder. I think that's kind of, what we're told. Honestly, I don't think it's like verbalized to us, but I think that's kind of our mindset going into Stanford. You're supposed to climb up the corporate ladder, marry this amazing man, have a bunch of kids, and just live in this palace in probably the Bay Area or some glamorous place outside of here. But, I felt like I was on track to do that, but internally, I just felt like my life was a complete mess. I was dating this guy and he didn't really like me. I was in a job really that, paid the bills for the most part. And, I was trying to be director of communications for that company. But, I don't think it was anything that was mind blowing or passionate. I felt very passionate about. But what they asked me to do was they asked me to be to be project manager for this conference and board meeting that was in Hong Kong. So at the time we were located in Palo Alto. And, it was a big deal because we just went public. I really just wanted to share the image and the profile for our company because we wanted to make sure that we were leaders in the world, the financial world. And so it was like a 2-month project. And, I just was not sleeping. Number one, it was because, I was in Palo Alto and the site was in Hong Kong. So every time I would leave from work, it's 7, 8 o'clock at night. It was Hong Kong's morning time, which meant that I would have to do a lot of stuff on the Hong Kong side. So, I was basically working around the clock. And I mean, that's pretty normal. I think that's what happens when you're trying to climb up the corporate ladder. You expect that that's what you're supposed to do. Mm-hmm. And, wasn't sleeping for maybe at least 6 or 7 weeks. And I really didn't think it was that big of a deal. I had the adrenaline running and, I was trying to kind of again, climb up that ladder. But there are a couple other things that were happening in the meantime. I was commissioner for Mountain View, which meant that it sounds so fancy, but it's not that fancy. I mean, like I basically would propose a lot of initiatives to the city council, and there were a bunch of like deadlines that were happening in March. So all this was really kind of like happening in March.
And you were like the youngest woman to have that position, right?
Yeah, I was the only woman,
The only woman
in the midst of 5 men,
mm-hmm.
and they're all older white men.
So Josie's a what, 32-year-old at that time, a 32-year-old Black woman yes. on city council with a bunch of old white guys.
Yeah. Yes. I was a commissioner. And yeah, we had a bunch of different like proposals that we had to do at that time. So I was doing the board meeting, I was doing the conference, I was doing the city council stuff, which I do a bunch of like church ministry. And one of the producers at our church asked me to be part of this Easter musical. So we typically do Easter musicals like for the past like 10 years beforehand. And so, I was a part of most of them. And he asked me, would you be able to do or play Mary Magdalene? And I said, okay, well, why not? I mean, this is what typically Easter, this is what you do. You do work, you do life stuff, but then you also do Easter musical stuff. And so I really was kind of like, okay, why not? So I was doing the Easter musical. I was doing, again, work stuff and then city council stuff all at the same time. So Easter Day, Resurrection Sunday, I did the Easter musical. It was great. It was just a wonderful celebration. And then I headed straight to the airport to go to Hong Kong because the conference and the board meeting were happening that same week. Mm-hmm. And, as soon as I got on the plane, I was knocked out. Like I slept for 14 hours, which made total sense because I was not sleeping at all for the past 6 or 7 weeks. Yeah. What actually happened was, when you're in an immobile position, things happen. And I didn't realize that, I was 32 years old and, you're not really concerned about your health stuff, especially you're just not really concerned about health stuff. You're young, you're just, I was perfectly healthy. I run, I do triathlons, all these different things, but I never really thought I would have to worry about my health until I did. So that 14-hour nap actually turned into kind of this huge health concern because I wasn't moving around. I wasn't drinking any water. A blood clot formed. It's called a DVT, which is a deep vein thrombosis. And it formed, I think, in my left leg and actually landed. It went up to my lung, which actually probably should have killed me instantly. But I always say it's like a saving grace. I had a hole in my heart, which I knew nothing about, literally. And the blood clot actually traveled directly to my heart, which caused a heart attack. And then it would travel directly to my brain, which caused a stroke. So, I mean, all these things could have killed me. It could have been the DVT. It could have been the heart attack. It could have been the stroke. And so I wake up and I realize, okay, something's wrong. I can't breathe. And as soon as I landed in Hong Kong, I collapsed. And so that started again, this moment of what is happening? What should I do now? Where do I go now? So my parents came to Hong Kong. I was in Hong Kong for about three weeks to recover. And, one of the things that really affected me, I think the only thing that really affected me was my ability to communicate. So going back, I was supposed to be director of communications for my company. And that's the only thing that this whole stroke thing affected. So I couldn't read, I couldn't write, I couldn't speak. And so, and I think in a lot of ways, my voice, I think a lot of things that I hid was I hid behind my voice in every way. From the time when I was young, people used to ask me to be a Toastmaster. They used to ask me to be to do presentations. They used to ask me to, I don't talk at weddings. But as soon as this happened, everything was just completely, I felt completely lost because, all these things, all the insecurities and all of the things that, I didn't want people to see, I now felt like it was completely raw and completely bare. And now everyone was seeing all of my faults and failures and everything.
Mm-hmm.
And I just felt completely lost. I didn't know how to recover. And so I sunk into a complete deep depression after that.
So you said that like communication had been the thing that you were hiding behind, but it sounds like it's almost like where your identity was. Like if people were proud of your accomplishments in that area or sought you out in that area, that's what made you feel like you were on the right track, you were whole, you were doing things, right?
And it's so funny because, I'm a Christian, you know that your identity should always be centered on God. And, when these moments happen, that's when you realize, oh yeah, my identity is not in God, it's in something else, it's like, it was like a divining moment of no, it's completely misplaced and mismatched.
Yeah.
I really need to kind of like find my identity in Christ, but I didn't get there yet.
Yeah.
I mean, I was, 4 months of just complete, like, I have no clue what I'm supposed to be doing. So I went to California after Hong Kong. They flew me to California to again recover. I wasn't working because I was still going to therapies. And, a lot of my friends kept saying, go back to your normal life. And so I tried really hard to go to parties, I tried to go back to, these game nights, but, I internally had changed in a lot of ways. You go through a traumatic moment and you're just completely different. But, I didn't want to show that. And so, I would run from those parties because I just didn't want people, number one, to know, all these again, all these insecurities that were inside of me. Like I always run from things. And I would find solace in my home, but I mean, it just wasn't really the right place to do that because the only thing that I could do at home was watch or look at social media. And that kind of that became kind of a hot mess for me in a lot of ways. Because
So just to put things in perspective for people, your parents live on the East Coast. You're from New York. You're living in the Bay Area of California. So you're alone in the apartment where your friends don't understand what's going on with you and your parents are far away.
Absolutely. And so because I couldn't read, that was social media was kind of like the only outlet for me to see people, to see my friends, to really kind of entertain me because, I couldn't really read in a way that I used to read or, find entertainment in that. And so in social media, you see people getting promoted, you see people getting married, you see people, having babies, all these things that like I really wanted to do in my life. And I couldn't do that because, I mean, I was recovering and I was trying really hard to kind of get back to where I was before. And so there were moments of, Lord, like, why in the world would you want me to continue to be here? If I just wasn't sure. I thought my gifts were, you're supposed to speak, and that was taken away. And I just didn't really know where my place was anymore.
Yeah. So at that point, we're going to talk a little bit, on this podcast, we talk about therapy. So you told me you had a therapy experience to help you through that, but it maybe wasn't the most helpful. And so I just, I'm pro therapy, but I want to be really candid that sometimes therapy doesn't work out. So tell us about that experience a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, so I was on workers' comp. And I found a therapist just because, again, I was going through this deep depression and I couldn't pick my therapist. So they chose a therapist for me. I wish it was a Christian therapist. I wish it was someone who kind of shared my like similar values. But because I hid myself so well, the only thing that I really that the stroke really affected was my ability to communicate. So everything like physically looked fine, and so we ended up just talking about like my love life, my relationship life, and she was kind of like, okay, let's talk about that. But there were a lot of like clearly a lot of deep issues that she needed to kind of like weed out and figure out like what was wrong with me. And so, yeah, there are a lot of things that unfortunately really didn't get resolved through therapy. And I wish they did. I mean, I was listening to, I think your second or third podcast about how to find a therapist. And I was like, oh my gosh, I wish I would have known. I wish I would have known, because that would have been so helpful, especially during those those dark times that I was in.
Yeah. And so now it's been a few years, but you're thinking about like, okay, this might be the time to kind of sort through some of those things that, for the most part, your life has gone really well in the last few years. Like you've been able to get more than one different job, like you have friends, you've had a relationship, like all of these things that have gone well. And yet you know that there's something in you that still needs to be sorted out because this was a trauma experience. So medical trauma, which a lot of us have experienced, is still trauma. So did you ever think about it that way? Like you told me you think you might have PTSD. So when was it that you realized that you might have trauma?
Yeah. So actually, I don't know like where you want to go back, but I you mentioned that there were so many things that, God really did for me afterwards. I mean, I actually ended up stopping social media, which was a really good thing. And I will say, social media has like wonderful benefits, but I think in my mental state at that time, I really needed to kind of figure out what God needed from me at that moment. And so once I did that, there are so many different avenues that God directed me to. I joined this company called FND, which is functional neurological disorders, with people who had brain injuries. And it was a really great like support group for me. And the funny thing is they asked me to be lead of communications for that company. So, I mean, there was just kind of a different pathway, I guess, for me. And then, my pastor actually asked me to join his ministry, to work with kids. And that was something that I felt also very called to do, like working with kids and trying to edify them and trying to build them up spiritually. And so that was really awesome. But through those different things, I realized there were certain things that were holding me back. And so, it hasn't been diagnosed, but I do feel like I do suffer from PTSD because there are a lot of times when, I get nervous about speaking in public. There are moments when, I remember stuttering. I remember losing my words. I remember, there are things that I felt like I really couldn't get out because of the whole aphasia. And, even though medically I'm fine, the doctors say, go talk, go speak. Like there are things where I feel are really holding me back because I remember those past experiences. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, I'm looking for a therapist right now to help me kind of like go through and walk through those things so I can have those tools to get me through some of those issues.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting that you're saying that right now you're still struggling with the idea of speaking in front of people, public speaking, whatever, because you've taken a big step of faith in your next project that's coming. And yeah, just this week. When this launches, it's going to be this week. So tell us about what your new project is.
Yeah. So after the stroke, I felt like God kept sharing or like telling a lot of things or sharing a lot of things with me. It's just so funny. Like he was saying, do podcasts, write books, do TED Talks and all these things that had to do with voice, with, me sharing or, using my voice. And that didn't make any sense to me because at that moment, I really could not speak. I couldn't really write very well. But over the years, God kept pressing it on my heart to, do podcasts, share God's story, because it really is God's story that, he's allowed me to share with other people, and write books. And so right now I'm launching this podcast called JoJo and Boog's Unexpected Hope. And it's about expectations versus reality. And, I think every single person has a story of, sometimes their realities don't line up with their expectations, but I want it to be really about, how they're using faith and resilience to get them through those experiences. So, I mean, we have really awesome people who are, who want to share their story. And so, yeah, it's launching Yeah, this week. So yeah, make sure you look out
So
for that.
July 1st, right?
July 1st.
Okay. So tell us a little bit about the format because, people are listening to this podcast. I'm hoping they're podcast people. So what can they expect?
Yeah, I mean, it really is about people sharing their stories. I've always been someone who's really interested in biographies and just understanding how God led them to their journey and like their scenario. And so really is about people just sharing their individuals. It's definitely like conversational style. So me and my friend Rachel Adicula, I call her Bugs. I mean, at some point we'll share like why exactly like I call her Bugs, but that's another point. But me and her are going to be interviewing just normal people about just their experiences of like how their realities just haven't like lined up with their expectations. So it should be a really fun show.
Okay. So that's going to come out on Thursdays or
It's gonna be
weekly.
Thursday. Yep.
Okay, great. And that's on the major players.
Yep. Will be.
Apple. Yeah. Okay. Great. And so you talked about podcasts, but you also said that God told you to write books. So what's the story with that?
Yeah. So after the stroke, I started to write a blog about my recovery, and that has now morphed into this book. And it really is about like my faith journey on how I got from, me being more selfish driven to me being more God driven. So again, that should be launching probably in August. I don't really have like a set time, but I think it should be like in August.
Sometime this summer, fall. Are you self-publishing?
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
cool. So we should look for that like on Amazon or
yeah, it's on Amazon.
It'll be on Amazon. Okay. And do you have a website or anything where people could find out more about you?
I am launching that website. Hopefully it'll be in the notes, but it's coming soon too.
Yeah. Okay. What's that address going to be?
It's going to be josettelangevine.com.
Okay. So I can add that to the notes so people can find you.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So Josie, like I got to see you go through these different phases and to see you work so super hard and then go through the medical emergency and the recovery. I remember like waiting for the next blog post to come out because we weren't communicating a lot on the phone or anything, but I knew like I would get the information when the blog came out. And then I would like call some of our other friends and be like, oh, Josie's blog is out. Did you guys read it? So getting to like walk through some of that with you and then see you on the other side of that. And like you maybe still have some of these residual feelings of like not feeling whole or not feeling like as good as you were before or things like that. But to experience you from the outside has been like a wonderful journey. So I just want to tell you that like you are a good friend and you're like just such a beautiful person and also just like inspiring because like I've had this dream of podcasting for about 3 years and then I'm slowly eking my way out and I launch and then you're like, oh, I'm launching a podcast. I'm like, wow, she's good.
That is the Lord.
I am really impressed with you. All our friends are so impressive, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
So I just want to say thank you for sharing that part of your story. And I hope that other people can find hope, as I'm putting out these podcasts and I'm really like with my launch team and people who are on my newsletter and all of that, I'm saying like, this is a way to get hope out to more people. By my slant is mental health. And I want Christians to be able to have hope for mental health. Your slant is a little bit different of that, like unexpected life circumstances and how God still works through those. Right. So this is really cool to be able to collaborate on you or with you. And I hope, for more and bigger things in the future. But before we wrap up, I ask all my guests, what do you do for soul care?
I love that question. I don't know if I mentioned this before, but I'm originally from New York, and New Yorkers tend to walk. We don't drive cars, we walk. And that's how I get my soul care. I mean, I shared before that, I walk maybe like 10 or 15 miles sometimes, like every day.
Oh my gosh.
That's really my time to just pray and really figure out where God is leading me.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, if you don't see me at home, you're probably going to see me at home at like walking somewhere.
Walking.
My dog.
Does Ethel come with you?
No, because she's very slow.
Oh.
Ethel's my dog. She's the sweetest thing, but yeah,
She's tiny, so her little legs don't keep up with you, huh?
Yeah. I'm a fast one, as she's like looking at me right now. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now, I remember one time like sharing with you, like I had a streak on the Bible app and I was like super proud of it. It was a couple 100 days of like consistent Bible reading. And then you pulled out your phone and you had like blown me out of the water by like 3 years or something like that. So I know that like consistent time with Jesus, whether you're walking or you're sitting on your couch, like that is a big part of your life too. So I'm so glad that he continues to bless you and you're walking faithfully with him and taking care of yourself. So thanks for being here, Josie.
No, thank you. Thanks for the invitation.
All right.
Hopefully we can do this again.
Yeah, we'll find us over on that other podcast.
Awesome.
All right.
Sounds like a plan.
The Soul Grit podcast is a production of Soul Grit Resources. You can find more at soulgritresources.com or on the socials at Soul Grit Resources. You can email me at info@soulgritresources.com.